Modern Vintage Radio.
Welcome to the Podcast Planner Show. This is all about podcasting with a content creation focus because content matters when you're sharing your voice with the world. In the last episode, I shared a formula that has your audience thinking, tell me. How about taking it a step further by having your audience think, tell me more, and episode after episode? This series is all about intentional content, and one way of creating content that engages your listeners' attention and loyalty is by intentionally using 6 triggers throughout your episodes. In this episode, you'll learn 6 triggers that will have your audience hooked. I started podcasting back in 2012 when there was no podcasting manual. Sure, there was 1 or 2 books on the topic, but with no actual templates or checklists. Fast forward to 2016, still no podcasting manual. I decided to change that. I have packaged 4 years of my experience into the Podcast Planner. All editions include the Podcast Compass, recording templates, and more to help you with your podcast. Get 2 free templates when you join the VIP email list or grab the complete planner by visiting thepodcastplanner.com today. The first trigger that will have your audience hooked is one that I covered in episode 12, but I want to bring it back because a call to action is very important. You should have one in every episode. The most effective call to actions are the ones that are episode specific. And having the same call to action does the opposite of what we want this trigger to do. It sets off the trigger of tuning out. That's not what we want. We want to keep their attention engaged. Trigger number 1 is have an episode-specific call to action. The second trigger that will have your audience hooked is a teaser or, for storytelling shows, the cliffhanger. From educational to storytelling type shows, you can use a teaser to create suspense and excitement for the next episode. This will also encourage the listener to subscribe because they don't want to miss out, so they'll subscribe so that they can automatically get the next episode. This next trigger sounds like a cliffhanger or a teaser. What makes it different is that it creates the initial need to listen to more of your show. Forrest Gump is the first movie that comes to mind. It starts off with Forrest Gump sitting at that famous bus stop. He's well-dressed, muddy shoes, a box of chocolate, a suitcase that when he opens it, it's neatly packed. This scene is intentionally placed at the beginning of the movie to trigger questions into the viewer's mind that encourages them to keep watching. Questions like, where is he going? And even thoughts like, look at this clean-cut guy with dirty shoes and a box of chocolates. Who are those chocolates for? Then the scene continues with a lady sitting next to him. He offers the chocolates. And so there we have the chocolate question answered part of it, right? Now we're intrigued by his way of talking. And we still have that question of where is he going? Where is he taking us with this whole thing about life being like a box of chocolates? And then the shoe talk. Then there it is. He takes us away from where he's at, the bus station, and starts to take us on his journey. And mind you, he's still at that bus stop. So the director and the producer want to bring you back to that opening scene to answer, where is he going? And after everything that we see on this movie, who is he going to go see? Starts to get personal, right? So this is an example of an open loop. This is the third trigger that will have your audience hooked. There are 4 ways of doing this. Number 1, the title of your episode. Number 2, the introduction of your episode. Back in episode 12, I discussed the what are you going to tell them intro. That structure still applies. All this does is add an element that doesn't give all the details. Number 3, a show level open loop is something I use in every episode. It's when I say this series is all about blank. This triggers the listener that they are in the middle of a set and they'll get curious and start looking at the previous episodes and download them. And they'll even get encouraged to think like, well, this show is a little different. It has a series. What were the series before this? It gives them a feel of the show. And if you intrigue them enough, if you're tapped into who your listener is, they subscribe to the show and even start downloading the backlog. It's a very cool thing to do. So that's an example of show level open loop. And the last example of an open loop is another show level. It's when I reference to a previous episode, like I just mentioned about the intro structure in episode 12. This open loop trigger creates the initial need to listen to more of your show. The fourth trigger that will have your audience hooked is branded segments. Now, this show that you're listening to is a very straight shoot type of episode, so I don't have branded segments. If I wanted to add a new segment to the show, then I would brand that segment with a fun name that describes it as a news segment, along with the transition sound in the background. An example that comes to mind is this talk show that I listen to, and they have a segment called First World Problems. And they announce the first world problems, and it has a little transition sound. And then it goes into what that segment's all about, which is people call in, they tell their host their issues, and then the host compares it to a whole other issue that some other person's having. And then the caller gets to choose which one would they rather have. It's a fun little segment, but instead of transitioning and saying, okay, next we're going to go into this, brand that segment. For example, this show names that segment First World Problems. So that name of that segment triggers the listener of what that piece is going to be. And for those who like that segment, they get excited when they hear the host announce that segment at the beginning of the show. Hey, today we're going to talk about this, and First World Problem segment. That encourages them to keep listening. This next trigger is fun to explain because I've been doing it to you throughout this whole episode. I've done it 4 times already. I call this trigger the topic North Star. It's when I remind you what the main topic is and I continue to discuss the supporting topics. So every time I said, for example, the second trigger that will have your audience hooked is, that's a reminder of what the main topic is. For example, the main topic for this episode is 6 triggers that will have your audience hooked. Not only does this remind the audience, it also helps with the what's next factor. Okay, the last trigger is the Easter egg. I'm really pulling back the curtain here because if you don't listen to the entire episode, you wouldn't have known what I'm about to tell you. For the loyal listeners who stick to the end, like after the music is done and they hear one of the following: a quote, a special discount code for the planner, or just an extra message. Not every episode has this, but a good majority do. It's a chance for me to say thanks to those who listen to the very end and build more of a relationship with. So there you have the 6 triggers that will have your audience hooked. Number 1, an episode-related call to action. Number 2, a teaser or a cliffhanger. Number 3, open loop. Number 4, branded segments. Number 5, topic North Star. And number 6, an Easter egg. These elements don't take a lot to implement. And what's great about them is that they make a big difference in your content and to your audience. Try implementing at least 3 of them. I think whatever type of show that you have, you can at the very least implement an episode-specific call to action, open loop, and an Easter egg. On the next episode, we'll continue our intentional content series with an exercise that helps us review our progress and refine our content. Just like we started our content creation with 4 questions, we'll end it with 5 easy, invaluable questions. This episode was written and produced by Addie Saucedo. That's me. For more episodes, freebies, and information, please go to thepodcastplanner.com. If you like the show, please tell anyone that is interested in podcasting, or leave your honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts. You can follow me on social media. Just search Podcast Planner. This show follows a series format, not your normal weekly format. So be sure to subscribe to the show to make sure you get all of the episodes. Our supporters are Podcaster Society, Podomatic, Team Podcast, Podfest, Spreaker, and Podbean. Thank you for listening to the Podcast Planner Show. Until next time, plan, record, and share your voice with the world. So you decided to stick to the end. It's great to have you sticking to the end here with me. I have a great quote for you today by Aisha Tyler. She's the host of Girl on Guy. Really great podcast. Unfortunately, it is on hiatus right now, but if you have the chance to listen to the show, I highly recommend it. But here is the quote that I have from Aisha Tyler that I think is so important as a podcaster trying to create content and find their audience. She says, "Your tribe will find you if you create something that is personal, specific, and unique to you." Thank you for listening to the show and sticking to the end with me. Kudos.